Oh, yes. Like those numbers.
See 50 next year.
How much?
50.
Maybe I should find it like part.
Spread it out.
Mine starts dragging. Yeah. I gotta get them something for Town.
Retirement, yeah. All right, everyone, I think we'll get started. It's a little after 6:30. Thank you for coming tonight.
Everyone turn their microphones on, sorry.
Yeah.
Please.
So on the screen, we have a basic agenda for tonight, and also tomorrow night is a budget study session tonight. Topics include the cigarette tax discussion, marijuana, retail marijuana specifically, and the red flag law. We're gonna actually go in reverse order. We'll start with the red flag law. And this is a study session. Typically, it's less formal than the regular meeting of the board. Tonight with us is obviously the board, but also the town attorney, police chief, myself, and the town clerk, and the audience for participation. Typically, we don't do audience participation during study sessions, but tonight the mayor will address that separately. But starting with the red flag law, if I may. I have a lengthy PowerPoint that Chief Dwyer gave to me. We're not going over this in detail because it has to really to do with law enforcement procedures. So I'm going to ask the town attorney to summarize our new law with extreme risk protection orders. And then once she's done, then the mayor will start with you. Okay?
Hi, okay, so we can, I don't know if we want to go through at least to the beginning of this PowerPoint. As Troy said, this is a pretty detailed PowerPoint that was prepared by the police chief of the city of Evans in connection with the city attorney for Commerce City, and they presented this at a CML conference in October. So this is probably much more detailed than we need, but it does give a little bit of background, so that part may be helpful. So basically, this is a new law that allows a petitioner to go to court and get a court order requiring removal of firearms and concealed carry permits. These are civil orders, and it requires a very lengthy process to go get these orders. And again, these are instituted by typically private citizens. They can be instituted by law enforcement, but they're more typically instituted by private persons. There are several different types of emergency risk protection orders. They're temporary and long-term, but each one requires, like I said, a pretty lengthy process to get them, and a court has to have a hearing on these to determine whether one should be issued. I think what we're focusing on tonight is enforcement. Obviously, we're in Weld County, and I know that there's been a lot of press over the Weld County Sheriff stating that he was not going to enforce these. I don't know where that is right now. I have not kept track of that. I will tell you that, and I'm going to also let the chief speak whenever the chief feels comfortable speaking, but if the chief receives a court order or any of his officers receive a court order, they are mandated to comply with that order. There is no discretion. So this is not something that we can choose to enforce or not enforce. A court order is a court order, and this is just another type of court order. So from a legal perspective, again, if the police department receives this order, the police department has to comply with the order. So I don't know, Chief, if you want to say anything at this.
That's about right.
Okay. And the police department, we would face liability, and so would the police department if we failed to enforce these orders. That said, and I don't know, maybe Troy wants to weigh in on this too, this doesn't change, in my mind, a lot of what's already been in practice for a long time. And maybe either the Chief or Troy can speak to that, but typically if law enforcement is going into a house where there is some dangerous situation and they have a search warrant and there are weapons there, they will often take those weapons and safeguard those weapons. So I don't think this is as sort of out of the realm of reality. This is what happens now, as far as I can tell, in certain circumstances. And I also don't think these are going to be super common, but maybe I don't think we're not going to get these. We're not going to get 7 of these a week. I would say they would be extremely rare.
Yeah, I would completely agree with what you're saying. Right now, if someone wants to hurt themselves by handgun or rifle, then we will remove that handgun or rifle from that residence no matter what. We'd put it in safekeeping locker, and you'd wait for they or next of kin to respond the next day likely, or if we take them in on a mental health hold. After their mental health hold and they're released, they can obviously return and we'll give them back their handgun or their rifle. So a lot of that's the same. The amount of time that we retain these handguns or rifles, that's being modified. So a lot of that's the same thing. And red flag law is if they want to hurt themselves or someone else. So I would also recommend that we look at this to a suicidal, not a homicidal. If it's homicidal, if they want to hurt someone else, we would take that and put it in an evidence locker, not a safekeeping locker, because a handgun that would be used in a homicide or hurt someone else, now evidence, and it's ours to be put in an evidence locker. So I think we're more or less, are we honing in on the suicidal aspect of red flag law? Is that what we want?
Well, I think it's both, but yes. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a lot of it now. It expands it a little bit, but yes.
And I want to add on the screen here, it says the temporary to long-term ERPOs with the red flag, the petitioner is a family member, a household member, or law enforcement. Typically, when I was talking to the chief, law enforcement, and even in my past history, we're going to work these cases as a crime or probable cause, more so than anything, which is our standard in our training, or used to be mine as chiefs. So it comes down to a family or household member and having them establish probable cause in front of a judge, district judge, or county judge, in order for that judge to be convinced that there's probable cause to do the red flag in the petition with the chief in the order. You hear a lot of rumor about this since it first came out, of how this may or may not go. I'll put it out there. I'm sure the mayor here is familiar, but I know with my background in Carl's, you know, we uphold the Constitution and all the laws and the ordinances of the United States. We don't always agree with them, but we do. And we use proper discretion at every move we can make too. So unless you two have something more to add, I'm going to turn over to you.
That's fine. Yeah, I'm happy to answer questions as we go, but maybe that, this is a good time.
Just a venture for that.
Yeah.
So first I want to start off with rules for the entire study session and all 3 topics. These can be emotional topics, and we want to be respectful to one another, right? Because we all have our own beliefs, and none of us are better than the other. Normally, for the public, we do not allow public comment during a study session, but these are emotional topics. So what I would like to do is each one of you will have an opportunity to speak for 3 minutes per item if you choose. Again, I ask you all to remain respectful and let logic rather than emotion lead. So, moving forward with the ERPO, I have a few things I want to say personally. We are nonpartisan here at the municipal level for a reason. We are here to represent everybody in our community, not just one side or the other. with that being said, I am personally not a fan of this bill, and because of the way it's written and the lack of addressing mental health. That's my personal opinion. However, there's a lot of concerns and a lot of people who are concerned for health and safety, and they feel like this is the answer. And just because I don't agree with the way the bill's written doesn't mean that their point of view or perspective is less than mine. Currently, as just stated, our officers can confiscate firearms, so that's not really changing. It's a little different, but not much. My concerns are the storage of the firearms, the potential increase of an extra cost associated with that. Kendra, correct me if I'm wrong, if our law enforcement officers go for the ERPO, you have to be present, correct, as our attorney?
If we're the petitioner, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so, you know, additional costs, so on and so forth, so we may, you know, need to be prepared for that as well, and then costs associated with storage, if we have to store firearms. I really hope that this isn't gonna be huge, but, you know.
We have to store for 364 days.
Eyes wide open, yes. So, my personal feeling is, it is not our job to judge law. It is our job on this dais right here to make sure that our employees and our community is safe, that we are responsible with the money that our taxpayers trust us with. And right now, our law enforcement officers may or may not feel like they're burdened. I cannot, in my personal opinion, feel and find any way to unburden our officers without placing another burden upon them or ourselves as policymakers. Meaning, if we tell our police chief or the officers that, no, don't follow the law, we're up for lawsuits, they're up for lawsuits, it's a law. There's a channel and a way to make these things change, and it's not here. With that being said, I'm not comfortable with this law. I don't love it, but I cannot find a way out of it. And I don't know how to relieve the stress and the burden. So, let's see here. I really do firmly believe this will be handled in courts on January 2nd. This law goes into effect on January 1st. And until then, I think what's best for our community, best for our officers, best for us, and best for everyone is that we let our chief and his officers do their job and follow the laws as written and uphold the laws. But that is my piece, and I really ask that everyone just remain respectful for all of these subjects. Are there any questions for Kendra, Carl, Chief Dwyer, Troy?
One of the things I have is in the law it says that they can hand them over to us, or we can have them go to a federal firearms dealer. So we talk about storage is a big issue, and storing them for $360 4 days, because that's how long they would be infected if it's long term. Can we say we're not going to hold them, but you have to go find a federal firearms dealer to store them at, so we don't have to have that liability of storing these guns and weapons here?
I don't know the answer to that, do you?
My understanding is they can either release them to an FFL or they release them to us, and we don't have a choice. We can't say, no, you've got to take them somewhere else. Someone walks up to us and they have this order and they hand them over to us, we shall take it. But it's either or.
I think that's correct.
It's not, they can't hand it over to a family member who does not have any RPO?
No, it has to be law enforcement or an FFL.
No, under the court order. Again, this is all going to depend what the court order says, but the court orders should say no, that a family member can't take them unless a family member, well, there's some exceptions, but generally we're going to have to comply with whatever the order says, and the order is going to tell us what to do with it.
To me, this is kind of just a feel-good bill. It doesn't eliminate the problem. If the person has an objective to hurt himself, herself, or another person, you take away their weapons, their guns. What's to say they can't pick up a kitchen knife? Or if they want to inflict health harm on themselves, what's to say they can't overdose on some prescription drugs? I mean, those are things that aren't even written in here or even taken in consideration with writing this bill. It's You're taking the possessions of the person's property away, but you're not taking the problem away. The problem is a person. It seems to me that if there is an issue with that person, maybe they should be first psychologically evaluated, detained maybe. I mean, I'm not saying go and arrest them or do anything like that, but set them up for some evaluation prior to taking their weapons or their property away. I mean, there is still due process in this United States.
With the ERPO, is there, just because they have ERPO issue doesn't mean they go in a mental health hold, right?
No, they're totally separate. I mean, there is a mental health hold, as you said, so that's another option, if, you know.
And that's 72 hours typically, right?
Correct, and they have to be represented by an attorney, yeah, so there's another whole process for a mental health hold.
Okay.
Well, my point being, if somebody wants to inflict harm on somebody else or themselves, the guns aren't the problem. The person is the problem. Guns just don't go out and do this on their own, it's the person. So, I mean, we need to address it at that level, in my opinion.
And just referring to what Carl said earlier, when officers investigate a call where someone may be suicidal, harmful to themselves or others, when that person, when the officer investigates to the point where they believe that that is true, you know, statements made or they find a note or the case may be, they investigate it a little differently. They still confiscate the weapon and they put them on a temporary hold for mental evaluation. So that officer's always pretty much been out there. But like Kendra said, yeah, this is unique's not the word, it's a strange situation where you're taking someone's weapon because they're harmful to self or others, but it's not coming along with the mental aspect as well. The judge doesn't decide on that on this request, on this petition.
And like I said, this is just kind of a bill, in my opinion, it's a feel-good bill to get it enacted. And then they can make adjustments and twerks or tweaks later on down the road to make it more severe. They're not gonna make it less severe. Where you can have somebody walking by or overhear a conversation about a total different topic, could have been a movie about a school shooting, and they hear school shooting, and then they call in, and then there you are, in an issue where you're getting.
Well, there is a whole hearing process though.
Well,
It
yeah, I
can't just be
understand that.
that,
I'm
just to
just
be clear,
saying
it
that-
can't be just overhearing a comment. Overhearing a comment would allow perhaps someone to file a petition, but then there's a huge process that has to go to a court.
But this is subject to amendments, right? They can't change this policy?
What?
They can modify this in this
Modify it,
session,
yeah.
Oh, only by another legislative
Yeah.
act, but right
Right.
now, the statute that we're dealing with, it has to go to a hearing, so it can't just be I overheard a statement, it would have to be I overheard a statement, and then you bring the respondent in and says, wait, I was just talking about a movie, I was joking, I was whatever, there's no way one of these will be issued.
And if that person is not telling the truth, they're held in contempt.
Exactly, they can be held
They're held responsible.
criminally responsible, exactly, so if you try to do this to someone just to get back at them, you know, for some reason, then you can also be held criminally responsible.
In the law, it also says that you will obtain a search warrant as well with this. So you would have to go in and search. So if he's hiding something, you know, because some people are going to say, well, I've got 10 guns, you know, so you have to go and search the whole house to make sure you got all that stuff and fill out the proper paperwork of what you confiscated and stuff.
Yes.
And Kendra, you talked about liability, and on 13-14.5-113, this is liability. I was briefed that we're not held liable if something happens with this stuff.
That's an exception only for basically non-law enforcement people who are trying to get an order, and if law enforcement is a petitioner. So law enforcement would be liable if you have a court order that's already been issued, that statute doesn't apply.
Okay, because I was told by
Well, okay.
that the judge said that it's that's the liability clause that releases liability for the.
No, I mean, no. If there's a lawful court order, that's sort of leading up to an order. So in other words, if you are in good faith trying to do something to get an order issued, and then you can't be held liable. But once the order is issued, if the police department doesn't follow an order that's lawfully issued, there is definitely liability. So that, unfortunately, that statute does not relieve liability for a lawful order once issued.
And that liability, that if the police department doesn't enforce the order, the liability for failure to do so ultimately falls on the town.
Exactly. It
And
is the
could
town's
be-
liability.
Could be damages, in dollars.
Yes, to both an officer and the town.
Also, this could take up to like, what I've read, 15 days, the time the initial petition.
14 days to have a court date.
Well, yeah, you have the first date that the initial petition's filed, and the 7 days after that, which can be extended another 7 days, so it's 15 days before it's actually issued. So,
Well, once it gets issued, then they have 14 days to have a hearing for the respond to the allegations, to try to prove he's not gonna hurt himself or anybody else, yeah.
my point being, it's gonna take some time, it's not like an
Yeah, he's gonna have to find a
instantaneous.
lawyer right away, do mental health right away, or whatever it is to try to prove his innocence, yeah.
The bottom line is, there's nothing we can do about it. I mean, am I correct?
That's
You
correct.
have, you have to,
I
we have
understand
to
we
follow the
can't,
law.
I'm just pointing out my opinion right now, I mean, it's, with Adrian, I don't agree with it. I mean, they started at the wrong level. They started with an added object that doesn't do anything unless there's a person behind it wanting to create harm.
Yeah.
It's the person behind it, it's not the gun, it's not the possession, it can be a hatchet,
So what do you
it
want
can
them
be
to
a
do,
chainsaw.
confiscate the person?
No, but I'm just saying they need to go evaluate the person before they do
In the
that.
meantime, they have guns and that they can harm themselves.
I think hopeful.
You can OD on drugs.
With the law.
You know, I mean, kill yourself with a knife, I mean, do some harm other ways. I mean, if they're intended on doing some harm on themselves or somebody else, they're gonna do it. It's not the gun, but my point's been made.
I think part of what I've been hearing and Carl and I've been talking about is the shoulda, coulda, woulda, what's gonna happen. I mean, we've been playing all these scenarios through our minds,
Yeah.
and that's impossible. I mean, and I've talked to people where, you know, the neighbor says they're drunk and they come, you know, they call the cops and they get an order and take their guns. I mean, I've heard some really ridiculous stuff, honestly,
Yeah.
based upon how the law is written. So, I think we need to pull back into the facts. I think it'd be a good time to hear from our citizens if they wanna give the opinion on this or not.
Absolutely. So at this point, if you guys wanna get up and speak, I invite you, I welcome you. If you can sign in up there, I'm given 3 minutes. You're more than welcome to. Anybody? Okay, let me get my timer for you.
Tick tock, tick tock. Wait, it doesn't start until after I sign in.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm not there yet, so wait.
Why don't you tell us the green light there?
Good thing I live on a short street. Oh, now you want my email address. Wow, that's a long one. Like you don't already have all this. Okay, there, go. So, you know, my feelings on this are, it saddens me that our legislature has put police officers in the position of having to choose between upholding the Constitution of the United States and state law. We can't fix that here, obviously. As for the rest of it, I agree with many things that Adrian has said in terms of the cost of this. And again, it saddens me that it comes down to the cost of, you know, these are human lives that we're talking about. Nick, I totally echo what you're saying. This is a mental health issue. This is not a gun issue. This is not a gun owner issue. This is not a gun rights issue. This is a mental health issue. And that the legislator had the opportunity to address this as such and chose not to is just, in my opinion, fundamentally wrong. And I guess I would just encourage you, as you go forward with exploring this a little bit more and looking at the ramifications, please look at that. You have to, we have to start doing something about the mental health problem in this country. I have lost 2 grandsons now to suicide. There is a mental health problem here, and that has to be addressed. And it's not a lengthy process, Kendra. It's a phone call, it's an immediate action, a temporary order is issued, so there's no lengthy process here. And then there's another, another course of action has to take place within 14 days. Fundamentally, that initial process takes place without the respondent even being notified that anything is happening. That person never has an opportunity to say, hey, wait a minute, I never said, I didn't do. The temporary order is going to be issued. The police are going to have to go in and confiscate the weapons. Y'all are going to have to decide where to storm, and I'm here to tell you, no federally licensed firearm person is going to want to take those off your hands because they oppose this bill. So don't look to them to come to the rescue for storing them. And then in that 14-day process, then and only then does that person get to come back and say, hey, wait, I didn't say that. That's not what's happening here. So some very fundamental things wrong with this bill. It still comes down to it's a mental health issue. We've got to start addressing this at the local level as well as the state level and nationally. We've got to do something about it, and we're not doing enough about it. If this is somebody's convoluted back way of taking away guns, you can't legislate evil. You're never going to legislate evil. There's always a way, You take away their guns, you take away access to AR-15s, they're going to run a truck into a crowded room of people. You can't legislate evil. All I have to say.
Thank you, Penny.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Hello, I'm Shane from Town. My comment is everybody's worried about the cost and all that stuff. The cost is not going to go away. This is going to be challenged in courts, and even though it's a law, it will be challenged in courts. If we enforce these laws, we're going to lose regardless, whether we enforce them or don't. My only thing is that I believe this body should get together and actually write a notice to the state legislature sharing that idea that the Constitution comes before state law and stuff like that. I mean, right now that's all we can do. Because I'm not going to say don't enforce the law. I don't want any law enforcement to get in trouble, fired, or penalized for that. And I don't want the town. But the other thing is this law is going to affect the citizenry. Those are the people that do get this thing have to come up with lawyers, maybe mental health. It's going to cost a lot to get their guns back. And if they can't come up with that, they're going to lose their firearms. If this turns into being a non-constitutional law, then we're liable for the loss of all them firearms and the mental degradation and stuff like that. So this really, the state has put us in a no-win situation, and I think that's something we should think about also. Thank you.
Thank you, Shane. I appreciate it. I was gonna ask you a question, Kendra. I forgot. It fell right out.
I know I did ask how much would a FFL charge for storing these weapons, and I was told $50 per gun per month. So it's not cheap.
If you take them, can you hand them over, Carl?
If I what? Sorry about that.
If you confiscate them,
Can
can
you
you
give them
hand
an
them over?
FFL? Not unless you're going to probably write a check.
Yeah.
So I'm sure they'll last the same amount.
I think it's up to the respondent if he wants law enforcement involved or if he wants to turn them over to the FFL. But if he turns it to FFL, then he's going to have to pay. And so if they have a dealer out there that they're going to charge. Right now, I was told that restraining orders, you know, they cannot possess any kind of firearm in a restraining order. They have to, they turn on the FFL, they charge $50 a month to store each weapon.
Okay. I remember, Kendra, if this goes into the courts, like I believe it will on January 2nd, and a lot of people believe that, is it likely there will be a stay of this law?
It will really depend on the circumstances. There could be a stay, sure. And in that case, we'd know immediately, and then obviously we would stop enforcing until the court says otherwise. But that, it would depend. It depends if it's filed in state court, if it's filed in federal court. If it's filed in federal court, there could be a statewide stay. If it's filed in state court, it would only be county by county. So it's really hard to say right now.
So if it is filed and there is no stay, we can't just say we're waiting?
No.
No, okay.
No. If it's filed in Weld County and the Weld County District Court says there's a stay in Weld County, then we can stop. If it's filed in federal court and the federal court says there's a stay statewide, then we can stop. Other than that, there's nothing we can do.
Carl, what kind of procedures are you putting in place to store the weapons and then maintain those throughout the time period that is required that we store it in?
We've looked into, I mean, we obviously have to make sure that these are safe. We can't leave them out in the snow, in the cold, so we're looking at some options. I also asked if someone wants to hurt themselves with a handgun, and they also have several other handguns in the house, is it our obligation to take all of them, or just to want all of them?
Right.
That's all.
So is what the unfortunate.
Unless you can show that one of them is owned by someone else and then someone else will take it, store it somewhere else.
Sure.
Then
There's no
the,
registration.
then the
We can't
house.
register that in Colorado, so that's hard.
Right,
Exactly
yes,
right.
yes. If they can prove that they own it, they'll take it somewhere else, you can give it to that other person, but.
I can honestly, and just, let's look at the last year. There was maybe one or two of these that would have likely been sent up. So it's not gonna be something, I hope not anyway, there's not gonna be a whole lot of these, knock on wood here. But we have to be ready, and so we've been looking into sheds, lockers, and just some options. For right now, we have no idea.
And then you're gonna have to take and maintain them and clean them.
No, I don't, that's not
No.
part of it.
Oh, it says that you have to return them back in the condition that they were received.
You don't, there's no affirmative obligation to do anything to them, other than store them safely.
Right.
You can't have somebody take them apart, but you don't have to do anything else to them.
So if they rust while they're in our possession,
That's.
Will they rust?
well,
No,
Yeah.
Yeah, if they're not in
Here somewhere.
the right like elements, I assume they'll rust.
Yeah, I thought there was something in here that said that.
What we will do is we'll keep them in climate control. I mean, the police department has a small evidence room. If it's just a handful, we can manage with what we have. If not, we'll buy a fairly expensive larger gun locker and we'll maintain them properly inside a climate controlled building. So there's no moisture, no rust, anything like that.
That was one of my questions also, is how come we can't release them to a mother or next of kin, and only if they're an antique can we release them to a relative? So there's an option, but it has to be an antique, and it lays out exactly what an antique is, so
it does.
it's not very often, it's not gonna happen very often that we're gonna be able to release them.
So 2018 is not antique.
No.
Just, you know.
Well, I know you mentioned a recent Weld County Chiefs Association meeting, the district attorney was present. And how's his office gonna respond to these?
They won't.
They won't.
Under any
No.
circumstance, they said, don't even waste our time.
Yeah.
But they laid it all on our city attorney.
Of course.
Sorry, Kendra.
No, I understand.
So we're having to figure out how to deal with that as well.
We will. And in all other counties,
Right.
in all other counties, the county's dealing with it.
So,
I mean, here the county's basically said, we're not doing it, therefore they're putting it all on us. In every other county, the county's dealing with it.
So in here on one of the sections, the Peace Officer Standards and Training Board shall develop model policies and procedures by December 1st, 2019 regarding acceptance, storage, and return of firearms required to be surrendered pursuant to the Article 14.5 or taken custody of pursuant to Section 16-3, whatever. And shall provide those model policies and procedures to all law enforcement agencies, each law enforcement agency shall adopt the model policies, procedures, or adopt their own policies and procedures by January 1st. So we need to make sure that we have some kind of a policy
Yep,
in place and how we're doing this. And
everybody's working on it.
Everybody's rushing to get this.
Any other public comment? Anybody else wanna get up? No?
No, that was just for signal timing, I guess.
I guess I have to sign in too, so.
Yes,
It's
please,
gonna
sir,
take me
thank
a
you.
while.
And just while we have a second, there may be an unfunded mandate argument here. Just the really boring argument is that the state is forcing us to spend money without giving us money, and that's a Tabor problem. So there may be a lawsuit that has absolutely nothing to do with Constitution or anything else exciting. It may simply be an argument that this is an unfunded mandate from the state, and that we don't have to spend any money to store. We don't have to spend any money on our city attorneys sending them, our town attorneys sending them to court, unless the state gives us money to do so. So if there's going to be a lawsuit, my guess is it's gonna be an unfunded mandate lawsuit, which again, is not really, the sexy part of this. It's just that may be the subject of a lawsuit.
And then legislation come up with a funding source and then.
Right.
So,
exactly.
seeing how
Right.
the officers have to write a warrant each and every time this happens, will they give us money for their salaries or their overtime?
Well, that is a little separate, because they're gonna say that's part of law enforcement, but these extra obligations that they're giving, the storage, for example, that's an actual cost that's separate and apart from your law enforcement duties, so that may be subject to a challenge. Me appearing in court on behalf of the town for something that came out of nowhere may be subject to a Tabor challenge, we'll see. I'm just saying, sometimes these laws are struck down for reasons that you wouldn't necessarily imagine. So, you never know. I'm just saying, if someone, the Tabor people, they bring lawsuits all the time based on, bills like this, so.
Thank you.
I'm Dan Thomas, and basically, everything's been said as far as mental health issue. Yeah, that's very true. Somebody's gonna hurt themselves or wanna hurt somebody else, unless they're really demented. It is a mental health issue. 19 vets a day commit suicide in this country, and that's really sad. And one of the biggest leading cause of death by gun is suicide, period. We talk about mass shootings and everything else, but suicide is the #1 cause, the leading death. And I hate to see our officers go into a house that has this to be enforced and be at risk for something that I believe is unconstitutional. And because I've met some of our officers and they're very fine officers.
Thank you.
And I imagine nobody from the state is here, so they don't hobnob with us down here. They've become like the federal government. So the two things that I guess most people are against is that one, the judge has to issue an order within 24 hours, as I've read the law. Well, you don't have time to notify the person that's being accused of whatever. So he's got to go back and do backward to bring it up to date, and that's really unconstitutional. But that's neither here nor there. You have to enforce the law, and I can understand that. We can only hope that somebody does file a lawsuit and it goes on up. But two things is that it's unconstitutional, and it is mental health. And she's right that it's a matter of calling if you see somebody that needs help. I mean, I had my nephew's son commit suicide at 13 years of age. damn sad. I had his father commit suicide. He was a Vietnam veteran. You know, it's just, this is not a good thing. We need mental health. And we need people to be aware of mental health and be able to step up and try and assist people. You know, and also our officers, I just don't feel it's a need for them to go into a situation blindly, you know. So that's about all I really want to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carl, have they issued any special training? Because we talked about mental health issues. So I think we can all agree that this is a mental issue, not the gun issue. Approaching these people, going in their homes, taking their property. I mean, they're already unstable as accused.
That's exactly right.
I mean,
And I'm actually worried a little bit about that. I certainly hope that, if an officer walks inside someone's house with or without a warrant, or with a warrant in this case, to remove someone's handguns or rifles from their house, I certainly hope that the worst, as in they get shot, won't happen, and that's what moves this up to the Supreme Court to get it overturned. I hope it doesn't make it to that level. As far as, we may have an option of utilizing SWAT, but a lot of the employees of SWAT is Weld County. So some of that stuff has to be worried about. Well, I'm worried about officer safety. That's my number one worry, in regards to.
well, I think it is ours too. I mean, you guys are on the front line there.
Well, right.
You guys are armed.
You're not
having to
saying-
uphold this law.
Well,
I'm just asking, are they gonna have backup? 'Cause
Well,
I was gonna say, you're not gonna send one officer by himself to
No, right.
do this order. You're gonna have a system in place to where you got a couple guys going in there doing the search, because first you're gonna have guys talking to the respondent, you know, and explaining to them what's happening to them, and then the other officers can start doing their search.
We're gonna exercise awesome officer safety no matter what, whether it's red flag or not, but in situations like this, knowing we're going into somebody's house who's mentally unstable, we're gonna absolutely err on the side of caution and.
Because you're gonna have to call guys in and say, hey, we got a red flag, we gotta go.
Sure, yeah, or we'll utilize other officers from other agencies.
Yeah.
We're gonna help each other out, we're not gonna let each other get hurt, that's the bottom line.
My worry was that if Weld County's not enforcing, is Weld County gonna provide the backup that typically they might? And I don't know the answer,
He will. I believe if something happens where he's got deputies, I think the sheriff just isn't gonna go out, he's gonna let them know, hey, this is what's happening, and you got a red flag coming at you, and you need to turn your guns over and be prepared for it, I think is what he was saying.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure if he's gonna be, I know that, Weld County SWAT is involved with several smaller, agencies, sends an officer in, so their SWAT isn't only made up of Weld County SWAT. Weld County SWAT involves some officers from every agency, so hopefully I don't think any officer, any sheriff, any chief is gonna let other officers walk into an unsafe environment, they'll be willing to help, that's my hunch.
Any other public comment? Anything else from the board?
I think there's, if I may, I think this is kind of the beginning. I think there'll be a lot that'll happen in January.
Yeah, and even in December.
Even in this next month. And there's some talk tonight, this is a legislative act by the state of Colorado, so if you really wanna make the change, that's where it's gonna be made, if it's not through lawsuits. So I think, next state election, people can get out and vote.
Get out and vote and write your legislators. Call them, email them.
So I guess one thing I have is, so for us in our community, are we gonna have a briefing in December saying that this is our procedures and this is how we're gonna handle stuff? So we have something in place when January 1st hits, and just so we're prepared for it?
Yeah, well obviously the police department will have procedures established in place, and I'll inform the board of what that will be, and how they'll handle it. Okay.
Yeah, because we'll wait until we get the ones from the state, and then, so it'll take a little bit.
Isn't that really an interdepartmental thing? We're not in the day-to-day business of telling them how to do their jobs, are
I
we?
think, true.
Right, that's
but
what I was trained when
but-
I started here.
In this situation, if the police department enforces these orders, I think the board should at least know what the policy is.
Certainly.
To be aware of how the police will respond, that way if you get calls, you can advise the truth of how they're operating.
And a lot of this is coming down from the state too, so I don't know that we're gonna have a lot of input, the board is not gonna have a lot of input into it, it's more just a,
Just so we know
Telling the
what our
community
procedures
what's
are, sure,
happening.
yeah.
But be informed, absolutely.
Yeah. Because we're the ones that are gonna have to approve the budget for them to buy a safe or whatever to store these in, and the extra time and officers to pay them.
and again, that's my suspicion that if this is challenged, it's gonna be based on the money. So we'll see.
And that'd be easy to fix the legislature next.
And that's usually how this works, so. It'll have nothing to do with the substance of the law, it will all have to do with the money.
So I think moving forward then, we kind of all agree there's nothing we can really do, just gonna have to, eyes wide open, watch, wait and see.
And if anything changes, legally too, if the lawsuit is filed, I will certainly let you all know immediately. If there's a stay or if there's, something else that's implemented, I will let you know right away.
Okay, thank you. Everybody satisfied with this topic?
Yes and no, but.
I just like not answer that.
Well, as you stated, Mayor, I mean, it's emotional. I mean, Carl and I've had many conversations about, in the positions we hold for the town of Platteville, we need to think a certain way, but personally, I don't agree with it. I support our Constitution and what it stands for, but yet it puts us in a bind. Huge bind.
Yeah.
And it ties our hands, so to speak, and that's why I said you have to vote next election for the state and change things if you don't like the way they are.
Right.
That's my political sound.
Okay, moving on then.
Marijuana retail discussions. Back in 2013, when marijuana started surfacing as far as discussion, first medical and then followed by retail, the town established a moratorium initially, and then by ordinance basically banned all retail establishments in Town of Platteville. And over the course of those years, some towns have lifted that. Even though from the CML newsletter, more towns are considering retail marijuana because it's obvious if you drive through some of these towns that have had the revenue for a few years, you can see the results of the revenues because they're Garden City, our neighbor to the north. You just drive down that main drag and see all the brand new concrete, asphalt, light poles, trees, so on and so forth. So it's a money maker. I also know a large part of the community that when this first came out, we put out an informal survey to the community, and it was overwhelmingly meaning 80% or more, 85% I think it was, with 100 some responded. So it wasn't the entire community. They weren't ready for it. So it keeps coming up in discussion, so I wanted to bring it up to the board as a conversation. I'm not promoting it, I'll be honest with you. I'm promoting having the 7-Eleven come in, cut a corner across the street, some other things, I'll be honest with you. Could it really help our budget? Absolutely, there's no doubt. It's a money issue. It just depends on how you want your town to be viewed. It's everywhere. Carl and I've talked about it on the law enforcement side. Eventually we may be completely surrounded, but I know there's a lot of towns that are now allowing it, and I get that. But as far as town manager, I want the board to know, I do want the board to have this conversation, but at this point I'm not promoting it. I want to finish the economic development plan and look at some other retail that we truly need, the citizens truly want. I can drive 20 miles north and get this if I want.
That's right.
So.
Or south.
True, but I can't, I'm a federal government employee, so I've got to be fired.
I'm here to represent the majority, or the citizens. Personally, I don't want this in my town, but I'm here to represent the majority. I think, to me, it feels like selling our soul. Yeah, the money looks great, but at what cost? That's how I personally feel about it. And I would suggest that if we're considering this and want to move forward with this as a board, we can lift the moratorium without taking it to a vote of the people, correct?
It's ordinance established by the board.
So I would suggest that we add it to an election and let the people vote.
And some boards have, councils have opted to do that, instead of putting it on their own shoulders, they let the community decide if they want to do it.
That's what I would suggest, but that's me, I'm one of 7.
Okay, well, let me put this out there. We already know that we have this big bill coming up for the water system. We already know that not only have we raised the water bill, but we know we're gonna raise it and continuously raise it and put the stress on our citizens to come up with this money. If we allowed the retail marijuana into town, that stress would be taken away from the citizens.
But then we're mixing funds and we can't do that.
We can take all the other ancillary things off the utility
Right.
bill on day one. Sidewalk fee, light fee, every other fee except for the water and sewage to come out that day.
Right. I mean, this is, the stress of this, I know my water bill is, I know every month I've gotta look at $140 water bill every month, and it's gonna get higher. We've already told our citizens we're gonna raise it until this is paid off. That's my opinion. It takes the stress off of our citizens as far as finances. And I agree, I think we should take it to vote for people, and see if they want it or not. But I would definitely like to have some kind of relief on my water bill. We're both senior citizens, and it's tough for us to come up with $140 every month. So, I don't know about anybody else.
Yeah, I don't want it in our community, but, I'm just one person, and I try to represent the voice of the people here as well, and I think, the best thing to do is not to have the board make the decision. Let's put it on the ballot in April and let the community decide if this is something they want to have in their community or not.
In a slightly bigger picture, I agree with putting the marijuana question on the ballot. But in connection with that, maybe other options that address revenue, increased revenue, should be on the ballot as well. Sales tax is a possibility. Mill levy increase is another. When I look at all of them, I'm kind of, at first I'm generally opposed to sales tax because it's regressive in nature. It impacts people at the lower ends of the economic ladder disproportionately. But then when I think about the location of Platteville and the 85 corridor, and throw the 7-Eleven in the equation as well, a good portion of this increased sales tax, or I should more accurately say if the town added a sales tax to the already existing state rate, a good portion of that revenue would come in from people who don't live here. Now, I can't quantify how much that is, but traffic going up and down 85, they're gonna stop here for gasoline, donuts, soda pop, liquor, whatever. And so that sales tax revenue is not gonna fall totally on the residents of the town. Sort of kind of wrap this up. If you're gonna put marijuana on the ballot, which is fine, put another income revenue increases on the ballot as well. And let the citizens pick. What I find in the town is there's always some demand for some new
capital improvement, which I don't find fault with. But if people want more services, they're gonna have to pay more money. Because nothing's gonna fly over town and drop $1 million bill in town hall. If you want more parks, whatever, you gotta pay for it. It's very simple. And the problem with managing the budget of this town historically has always been that a large part of the revenue is subject to really large swings as a result of the oil and gas business. When it's great, it's wonderful. When it booms, it's great. When it busts, it's equally hard to manage. If the town's income is coming from more sources, diversified sources, it makes the revenue stream more predictable. It's still gonna vary with the oil and gas business, but it's not gonna vary as much if you have an underlying tax base which is more predictable. The marijuana question, that I'm not gonna make a case for that one way or the other. I mean, it's very profitable for towns. I think the number we saw from Garden City was $390,000 in 1 year. Which is, if we had another $390,000, it'd be a lot easier to run the budget here.
Closer to 1.5 million.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, you're right, I misquoted that number. But maybe options for additional revenue would be a good valid question. I mean, pick and choose, pick all of the above, none of the above, pick one, not the other.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I'm just saying, it's really hard to do that.
It's not a multiple choice question.
Exactly, we can't do multiple choice ballot
They
questions.
can't do separate questions?
Separate question.
We
There's
do
three-
separate questions.
Yeah, three
Sure.
separate ballots.
Sure, yeah, that would be fine.
Yeah, I think that's what he's saying.
As the three being, shall we allow retail, shall we allow medical, shall we allow both, or?
No, shall we raise the sales tax? Shall we raise the mill levy? Shall we
Oh.
allow marijuana dispensaries?
All three separate revenue
Mhm.
potential issues.
Well, but you need a separate marijuana tax too, so just because
You
you
don't
would
have to.
you don't have to, but if you're, the way everybody makes money on marijuana is
Garden
by,
City doesn't.
okay, most impose a
Sorry.
separate, most impose a separate marijuana tax.
Yeah, I know.
So, sorry, that's what I was thinking you were talking about, is that you would have a separate if you were gonna put marijuana on the ballot, my suggestion is you put a marijuana tax on the ballot, because otherwise you're just getting your regular sales tax, which is not self-collected, so you're not gonna see a huge increase, because you're not home rule.
They get $1.5 million in sales tax revenue.
So you
They
could,
don't have a separate.
you could add a Town of Platteville marijuana tax.
Yes, and that's what
on the
most
ballot.
communities do. If they allow marijuana, they have their own separate marijuana tax, that's separate than their sales tax. That's usually where the increase in revenue comes from. I think that's an outlier,
Probably, yeah.
a huge
That's
outlier,
true.
because everywhere else in the state, you don't see that kind of increase just from basic sales tax. It's really only if you have a separate marijuana tax, so.
And can we limit how many, if it
Yep.
does pass, can you say we only?
You can say we only
'cause
want
we're a
one,
totally
you can say we only
small
want
community,
two.
So we don't
Yep.
need 10
Right.
dispensaries in town if it did pass.
A lot of communities, I think Golden still only has 2, you know,
And you
and
could
they,
restrict where in town.
you can
Right.
restrict where,
As
you can
well.
restrict how many, you can restrict
The hours.
licensing. Yeah, you can do you can do hours, there's all kinds of things you can do with it. You could say we only have one, and it's first come, first served, or it's the one we like best, or, I mean, there's a lot of different things you can do.
We could double dip, we take the 15 acres we bought, subdivide it, lease it out to marijuana dispensaries, but lease payments and sales.
There you go.
There you
They
go.
let them build a warehouse and. So I've done,
Cultivation business.
I've done quite a bit of research on this topic, and I've made no, buts about it. When I got elected, everyone knew that I was pro marijuana, I got elected, right? So, I spoke with the mayor of Log Lane Village, which if you're driving down 66 and you blink, you probably didn't even know you went through it, but they have a population of approximately 900 people. They went from being bankrupt to having $800,000 in their savings account today. They've been able to replace all the water lines in their town, to take care of all the street maintenance. They added 2 parks and paid off their water tower loan. I asked the mayor, have there been any crime increase? What's your opinion on marijuana in your town? She said, we have 0 crime. We added another police officer at the time we passed this, just in case, to kind of quell the public. And we've seen 0 crime. What we see is domestic violence, things like that is normal. But the dispensaries bring no crime. She said, I think anyone who does not do this is totally crazy. That was her exact quote, the mayor of Log Lane Village. I also spoke with the town administrator of Garden City. They went from $360,000 to $1.9 million in 2018. You guys have seen what they've been able to do. That was a pimple on Greeley before this happened, right? It transforms communities. When you say, I have a list here of all the communities, and this isn't a comprehensive list, it's 2018, but when you say we don't want our community to have a negative connotation, I mean Breckenridge, Telluride, we're talking about the highlights of Colorado. They're on this list, the destination points. So we're gonna talk about the bad connotation? I just don't understand that at all. There's a map here that shows what the mood that the country has kind of gone in the last 6 years. In 2012, Colorado and Washington State were the only fully legalized. We've now gone where we have 20, 25, 50% of the country has legalized some portion. We're going to get left in the dust if we don't just make this happen. I understand I'm totally for putting it to a ballot vote, but I also would say that that's already happened and it passed. So let's just get it done and start getting money, in my opinion. But that's all I have to say about that.
I just have a problem with it being, everybody looks at the money, and that's where my issue is. It shouldn't be about the money, it's a drug. Some people use it for aches and pains, which is good, but I don't think that, we just should pass it based on revenue resources. So that's my opinion, and I know some communities are doing great with it, and let them do great with it. I just don't think we need it in our community.
Well, and it is just money, it is the money, and it's taken the stress off of our citizens as far as tax. Like I said, we already know we're gonna be raising the water bill, and we'll probably have to.
Everybody in Colorado
taxes.
is getting their.
The citizens are already griping about how high the water bill is. So I'm looking at it as taking the stress off of our citizens as far as finance.
To further your point, Hope, this board is considering passing 7% increases total in our water bill tomorrow, probably, right? 5% on the sewer potentially and 2% on the water bill,
Yeah.
perpetually. And we're perpetually going to raise the bill. We have a solution to offer some relief to that.
Right.
The water bill is you can't escape that here.
Absolutely, right, but I'm not saying we can offset the water and sewer costs, but we can take away the additional fees on top. That's the really
Understood. I just would point out that this is what geologists call a high plains desert. Anybody who's lived here for any length of time knows that water is a scarce commodity in this part of the world, and it's going to continue to be so. And treatment of water, whether to make it drinkable or to dispose of it, is going to be forever cost more every year from now until hell freezes over. It's just a fact of life that some years we get blessed with 20 inches of rainfall in a year. Other years, maybe 12. So snowpack and runoff is a way of life, and increased water with an increased population and the same amount of water. This is simple supply and demand. When the demand goes up and the supply doesn't change, the price goes up. And it's gonna continue to do so. There's no getting around that, unless somebody's got a way to make it rain that I don't know about.
Yeah, and we can take the sidewalk fee off of the bill if we want to say, you know, we're concerned about the water bill, then we'll just work out of the capital improvement budget to, fund sidewalk improvements.
You'll do less projects, I mean, that's where I gotta speak up, I mean, honestly.
Right, yeah, so.
We always have
if the-
more projects than money, no matter how many. And I'm not trying to argue with you, but to be devil's advocate, and I appreciate Spencer, you do a great job. I know, the town manager over in Garden City, and I think she's a fine lady. But when she or the mayor of Log Lane out by Fort Morgan said there's no crime, of course not. They don't buy it there and smoke it there, they take it home. That's where they commit the domestics, that's what they drive off the road, that's where they get stupid. And as far as the stats are concerned, somebody smoking one marijuana joint once a month compared to somebody binge drinking each week or smoking a pack a day, that's not a right comparison. No, sorry, that's not a right comparison. I guess my point of view, this is purely personal. I spent almost 20 years in law enforcement, most of them in southern Kansas, 5 years here before I took over as town manager. I made a lot of drug arrests, a lot of meth, a lot of PCP, and we always interview, we want to know how they got to that point. And I want to say everyone, but I'd say 99% start with marijuana. Because they don't get the same high, and that's not everybody, it's not recreational. Those are the ones that get addictive and can't control it.
I was asked by a member of our older community that worked at the school to speak on her behalf, and she said, absolutely not. Why don't you have the officers talk about the drug problem we have in the middle school now? And so that was a perspective that I was asked to bring forward tonight. I don't know how bad it is.
So you're saying that if we put a marijuana dispenser in here, that the drug problems that we have now are gonna?
I believe that was her perspective, yes.
Well, adults, I mean, you think through the process, not just local citizens who will buy it here locally. I mean, like Log Lane, I got family lives out Fort Morgan, that's not Log Lane residents. I mean, that's Nebraska coming to Kansas. I mean, they're driving down 76 smoking a joint. I mean, I get that. But, and Fort Morgan, of course, they don't allow it either.
You know, before it was legal, they were driving down the road smoking a joint anyway.
And I arrested quite a few. But I'm not opposed to the retail. I get that. Like I said at the beginning, it is a money maker, you know, and I know these other communities allow it. Not all the people in these communities like the idea, obviously. I've talked to some of those people. I mean, I've been to Breckenridge and obviously Longmont, different places. If you don't put to a vote, I mean, I'd support that. You know, let the community decide on some revenue options, and if they decide, you know what, let's bring in pot to Platteville, then let's do it. I don't care. I mean, I'll just manage the budget.
I'm curious, is there any public comments on this topic?
I have.
Will you fill out the forms yet, please?
She's got her notebook, she's got notes.
Yeah, no, it's not much notes, I really don't have that much to say. I need an address.
Those are cheap to make.
I know, I need a new one, right? Okay, I think a lot of stuff that I've already said.
Name and address.
Oh, I'm sorry, I have to say it too. My name is Dia Perringer, and my address is 13031 County Road 38 in Platteville. I think a lot of you, and Spencer said a lot, and Larry also said a lot, that I had been thinking about our location, and getting on to allowing dispensaries in while we can, you know. I think you guys all covered a lot of it, but for those of you who are opposed to it, I hope I can kind of expand your mind a little bit to the view of what the liquor store does to people in this town as well. I think it's funny that we've not, or let's say funny, it's interesting that we just talked a whole lot about mental health. I am so for marijuana because that helps me with my own mental health kind of a thing. I've had my own deals with alcohol in this town, and seeing other family members and things like that having their own issues with it. I think that store being in this town is just as tragic as you guys probably think as a dispensary would be. I don't think a dispensary causes any kind of problems like a liquor store causes. So half of the town, I'm pretty sure, views the dispensary as an amazing thing that would be coming in, and view the liquor store the way that you guys view the dispensary. So I love that you guys are all talking about putting it to a vote, and I think that's great. I really, really do hope that you do. I really love your idea of putting multiple things on for a vote. That was a great thing that I heard tonight. So that was all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Deanna.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
You go, Dan.
Do I gotta sign in again?
Yes.
Shane Quintana again. I think the vote is the way to go. I don't think this board should make that decision because it's so divisive. If you want to tear the town apart, that's taking this vote out of the citizens' hands. Whether it passes or not, then the citizens that voted are, you know, nobody can really blame this board. And I think that's a big thing because this board has to stay productive, and this is one of the things that can make it unproductive because then there would be blame and all that going back and forth about who wanted it, who didn't want it. So I'm not personally for it, but I think the democratic thing to do is let the people vote for it, and this is what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Shane.
Mary, what's our deadline to establish a ballot? Is that February, March?
Yeah, it's about, I'll say February.
February?
Early.
Okay. We got plenty of time to generate some.
Dan, did you want to talk?
Yeah,
Good to like have an action item that's been signed about it.
Yes.
I agree. I'm Dan Thomas again. Haven't changed. But I agree, a vote I think is a good idea, and optional ways of generating money. I know money can be tied in a small town. I've lived in a small town quite a few years, even before coming to Platteville. And I think Platteville does a very good job, by the way. I think y'all do. Even with the capital projects, you know, it's always something.
Yes, sir.
I particularly don't like it. And the small medical marijuana, maybe, you know, I don't have a big problem with that. But a marijuana and alcohol, actually it almost brought us to a second revolution back in 1700s because they wanted to tax whiskey. So, you know, that's something else. And to say, you know, it has no effect, if they knew what they know now about aspirin, it would not be approved. So, you know, we don't know. And, you know, there's all sorts of questions, pros and cons. Yeah, it can bring in a bunch of money, but you have to look at Garden City of where it sits too. You have Evans, you have Greeley, and, you know, you have a much larger population there. You know, to generate $1.9 billion. It sounds like a lot of money, but will we generate that amount? I doubt it. Okay, and I don't know if we have a sales tax or what it is, but you know, a percentage increase on it or something like that. I have no problem because we're gonna have to have money. I understand that, or mill levy. You know, just to keep our heads above water. But, you know, we only have the one liquor store, thank God. But, you know, there's things to be said about it. Yeah, we can raise money. Yeah, but to say, you know, please don't go to Breckenridge and Dale and all those, you know, for me, because I need those spots. Now you love it, so I can't. Okay, and I hated Breckenridge then. But, you know, I think to put it to a vote, I think that's the way to go. And to put options on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Arm wrestle.
No, you're fine, go,
You go ahead and I'll write down my name. Save some time.
There you go, 'cause my name's already on there. Yeah, please, the $5 that you're gonna save me on my water bill, don't sell out. Come on, really, we're better than that. You know, Spencer, I applaud you for your diligence in your homework. I would challenge you not to just talk to the mayors, go talk to the people that live there. I have a daughter that works for this community that lives 2 blocks from Garden City. Have a conversation with her about what her neighborhood is like now, okay? I would also challenge you to go back to the mayor of Log Lane Village and ask how their meth problem is, okay? It's not always what it appears to be on the surface, so you have to dig a little deeper than what might be on the surface. There are enough other places that people can go get what they need, if that's what they need, without us having to have it here. And so, yeah, you have to go to a vote of the people. You can't just arbitrarily turn over something that the people want, even though it was a poll process said, no, we don't want this here. So it has to go to a vote of the people. Larry, I think you're headed in the right direction. There are other ways to, I know, it's okay, it'll be all right. No, I think you're headed in the right direction with some of. I know, it happens. You might want to back up for the lightning strike, but I think there are other ways to address this with the sales tax, with those other types of things that really would not impact the citizens of this community as much as they might initially think. It's going to be an education process. I also, Spencer, what I'm not seeing from you is what is the cost to the town? You're all about the revenue, but there are going to be costs involved in this. Not to mention the fact that just a few minutes ago we were talking about Second Amendment rights possibly, and now we're talking about something that's still federally illegal, but let's jump on board with that. How far down this path are we going to go? That's all.
Thank you, Penny.
Hi, Larry Hatcher, 715 Rogers Circle. I think, to me, some things are obvious. Either you think marijuana is good for you, or you don't think it's good for you. Probably not going to change minds one way or the other on that. The point is a lot about the money, and I've heard statements like it's a lot of money. Examples of towns that have taken in a whole lot, but we haven't heard anything say, I think Platteville would earn about this much. To say we're going to do as good as Garden City ain't going to happen because we're not next to a large population. We're not next to Nebraska, Kansas. We should be able to find enough smart people to say, with our population and the area we live, we can make an estimate it's going to be about this much. Now that's going to be tough to do, I understand, it's an estimate, but it's something people can make a judgment on. I think election is the right thing to do with that. And also, it's been brought up, there is a cost. All the money we take in isn't all revenue, you gotta put more money in, probably law enforcement, what other things are you gonna spend it on? So the bottom line is what I'm saying is try and give a good estimate of what Platteville will gain or lose. I think the board can appoint some educated people to do that, and then go ahead and let the people decide based on your best cost estimates and expense estimates.
Thank you, Larry.
And Larry, that's a good point, because there's towns that I can easily just call and ask them what the revenue streams are from it, so we can get it.
I tried to look for some online, and it was really hard to do because they didn't put it out because it reflected individual businesses too much.
Yeah.
I did find some
Well,
county information, and if you look at just counties, it doesn't look near as good as if you lived in Garden City.
I'll just
for
call
example.
town managers directly, and they'll tell me.
And I just wanna be clear, I'm not saying we're going to get Garden City money, but there will be additional
Be
money,
more money,
for sure.
yes.
And are we on 85? Are we on 66? Are people coming home from work that wanna stop there on their way home instead of drive 20 minutes either way?
No, all
There
I'm
will be
saying-
revenues, for sure, maybe not the same.
All I'm
And-
saying is we need to try and give them a best estimate that we can do. Here's what we think it will be. You know, prove you wrong.
Why do we have to do that?
Well, I think so you can make a good decision. There are people saying, look what Garden City looks like, and because they got all this marijuana money, and they say we can be just like that, and that won't happen. I just think we need to try and be honest with ourselves and to the people that are gonna vote on it.
There's a cost to doing that, though. We have to put money,
Well,
just to
yeah.
get that number, we probably have to
But
put
I
money.
think it's
you know what I
an
mean?
important decision to make, and we need to try and be as accurate as we can.
And as far as addressing your second point about the costs, some of the towns, most of the towns, that they hire an additional staff member potentially to take this on, but they also have, licensing fees for the dispensaries that they put in place to cover the cost of that salary. So most of the costs are covered by additional fees that are put on the dispensaries.
They're recouped.
Yes.
Yeah, I know.
So those are not put on the town.
You're right.
And I spent some time online too, and I mean, I found a survey done by a reputable organization that said for every dollar you take in, you spend 4.5. Now, I don't believe that either, but that also goes back to try and come up with an estimate. Here's how we think it'll work, and let, you know, be as honest as you can be, and then give it to the people to decide.
Eyes wide open.
Well, and that would be true for any other alternate taxation that might appear on the ballot, that should be accompanied with estimated revenue.
Yeah, it legally has to be in the ballot question first. Yeah.
In 2009, when we first put the sales tax increase, we generated an estimate based upon what 2% was, because we're asking for 3%. So
Okay,
we'll
that
get
wouldn't-
we'll have that number.
Would that be a legal requirement for the marijuana?
Yeah, any sales tax, any tax. Under Tabor, it
Okay.
has to read, shall
the-
Town of
for
Platteville
the
taxes
tax,
be
if you-
increased by blank during the first fiscal year.
So we're, there are two questions.
Two questions, yeah,
Right.
Asking if they want marijuana, no. Asking if they
No.
want marijuana tax, yes.
correct,
Sorry.
yeah.
Rebecca, how you doing up there?
Rebecca Sprague, 730 Rogers Circle. Personally, I am not for bringing marijuana into the town of Platteville. Again, it's majority rules. Personally, I don't feel like our little town needs it. There's definitely other places that people can go to get it. Based on what it costs to put it in here, what are the costs to regulate it? What are the costs to make sure that it stays where it's supposed to be and it doesn't get into our middle schools? That it doesn't show up in an edible in a Halloween basket? Like, what are those costs? Those are my concerns, is how do we keep it out of the hands of the kids? One of the main reasons my son left Platteville Middle School was because he came home one day and was like, there are 15 kids behind the trash dumpster smoking pot, Mom. I'm not going to school there anymore. How do I argue that?
Right.
I can't argue that. He's a good kid making a good choice. We left the town because of that. My kids did not finish their high school and their middle school here in town for that reason. So yes, I'm against it. That's it.
Thank you, Rebecca. Anybody else? Anybody on the board?
So I'm doing some thinking, and my thoughts never came together before somebody else had their thoughts together, but, I agree with what Larry's saying. I think diversity is key. We have a great town manager that can pull money out of a hat. I mean, this guy's got ways of finding money, getting money, allocating money somehow. But I'm also on the side that we, as a board, have to represent the town, and by doing that, it needs to go to a vote. But I would request that there would be a marijuana sales tax substantially to make that. I mean, I'm not for it, but I'm one opinion, and I don't represent, I represent the whole town, but not as my opinion only. So, that being said, I mean, I agree with putting it on the ballot as a vote, or put it to the vote, but also having the other options out there, stating that, you know, they're all gonna be taxed. It's not just having a marijuana dispensary here. It's gonna be our sole proprietor of our revenue. Location-wise, I'm pretty hesitant about if it's gonna be that profitable. I mean, when you live between Fort Lupton, Greeley, Longmont, all them, I mean, it's kind of, people have got their, set in their ways and like going to certain locations, and I don't know if being close, if we're just gonna attract the people in town, which is gonna be, in my opinion, I don't know, just guessing, it's gonna be a small to moderate business. But I guess it's really all I have to say. I just think the people should speak about it. Down.
We would definitely look at what other sales tax rates are out there, so if that's the case, in order to attract that revenue, you want to be comparable to the Millikens and Garden City. Well, Garden City doesn't have it, but those who do.
Yeah. But I also agree with your comment there too. It's not the revenue cost that we're looking at, it's the cost of our children and the cost of, again, I mean, we don't have enough studies here. It's not been legalized long enough, and people haven't been studied long enough to have a good idea of long-term effects. Long-term, we talk about mental health. I mean, it can have positive effects, it can have negative effects. It all depends on the person's makeup. It's not a straight across the board scenario. So, I think stepping into this is I don't know, there's more costs than just monetary value that we're putting on the line here.
And would it have to be a certain distance from school?
We have
Yeah.
certain regulations.
Whatever the law is, or is there a certain state law that is?
Well, in most places aren't, it depends on the community. Some places are allowing it in zoning right on their main street, other ones are putting it in industrial parks. I mean, it just kind of depends on what you, those are decisions you're gonna have to make also, not just whether we allow it or not. Where do we allow it? I've heard both sides, I struggle with myself. I mean, we're all in agreement in this room, there's no question, we need some more revenue. Talking wastewater, water, and parks, and this and that, no question. How we get, that's the question. I've gone back and forth because you're right, I try to find ways to find money. You know, sometimes we get tired of writing grants, you know, we've been fortunate. Those are dry up. When the oil gas busts again, severance tax gets restricted like it did back in 09 and 08 and 2010. I've gone back and forth, you know, in my own personal experience. I've got a youngest son that has severe asthma, you know. A couple summers ago, I can't even hang in my backyard because I'm not smoking it, but all my neighbors are. Not all of them, but enough where I can't even open my windows at night. But it's funny when they have small children, which I know the neighbors who did, they stopped. I don't smoke marijuana. It's funny how the things happen like that, but we have it in town, okay? I want to be very clear. It's not like we don't. We have it in town, and it's in big amounts.
Legalized use.
Just, do you want it down the street from where you live? That's where it comes down to.
Is like a CBD dispensary, is that different than marijuana, Kendra?
Is what, I'm sorry?
Like CBD?
CBD isn't, yeah, that's, CBD is allowed anywhere.
Oh, okay.
It's not marijuana.
They got a gas station there.
Yeah, they can have it right now.
Okay.
This is
Kendra, a question I have is, if it has to be two different ballot questions, number one, would it be allowed? And then number two, do we tax it? Can the two be correlated together, that if the tax wasn't approved, that by default, it's not allowed?
So they're both permissive. So it's up to the board, so, you know what I'm saying? So even if it passes, if the tax fails and the voters say, yes, we wanna allow marijuana, it's up to the board to implement. So if the board says, no, we don't wanna do it without a tax, you can walk away from that. So the ballot questions, we can, there's a couple of different ways to draft it, that's not something we need to, yeah.
Just didn't know,
Yeah.
because I know,
I'm sorry?
I know there was a school that was allowed to be built. They got the money to build the school, but they didn't get the money to fund the school.
Oh.
So
Yeah,
the
we-
school board went ahead and
we-
built the
yeah, we can
school,
work it.
and then kinda said, well, we got an empty building here, are you gonna fund this?
Go ahead.
I was just going along with what Dave was saying, you can coincide the two, like you said, that if we don't have the tax revenue from the marijuana dispensary, then we're not okay in the marijuana dispensary.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
That's after it goes to vote, we can shoot it down then?
Yep.
Or,
You can have it go to the vote and then still not have marijuana. You're still elected. So the vote can say, shall we allow marijuana in the town? And even if the voters say yes, you can still say no.
well, that's taking the rights of the voters
Right.
away by telling the majority say,
No
yeah,
sense
we
in
want
having
it.
it on.
I'm just saying legally,
Right.
it's an advisory question.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you would, but I'm saying that
Well, I'm just saying
the next
personally, I
person
wouldn't.
after you could.
No, we're not the
Voters
federal,
aren't
we're not the
being
federal
asked.
government, we're local government.
Yeah,
Voters aren't being asked to mandate that
State, yeah.
The
that
voters
we
don't
put
get,
in.
right.
What's that?
The voters aren't being asked to mandate that the board institute a marijuana business.
Right.
They're being asked, shall it be allowed?
Yeah.
It's considered an advisory question. It's already allowed by the state, so whether local voters want to allow it, it's an advisory question which you can choose to ignore or choose to, implement. It's entirely up to you. It's still your decision in the end, is all I'm saying legally. I'm not saying you would go against what the voters do, but
And then the taxes could be part of the requirements of having it in town. Okay. That's
Yeah, if they didn't pass the tax,
if they don't
then
pass
we'd
the
be
tax, you don't
obligated
see the,
to license the dispensary.
Well, I think I may wrap this up.
Yeah, any other public comment before we wrap up? Anything from the board? Okay, moving on, yes, please, Troy.
Well, I think it's been a pretty productive discussion. I mean, it's a personal issue, just like the one previously. Whether you like or you don't, we all agree it's a moneymaker. I've gone back and forth myself, professionally and personally, but I don't know if I'm there yet, to be honest with you, because it surrounds me.
It sounds like we just wanna put it to a vote.
I know, we're gonna put it to a vote, and I think I think the people would appreciate that, give them a real voice. If they want it, they want it, if they don't, they don't. And I'll work on getting those comparables for taxes as well as just general revenue from, I've been looking at some of these smaller towns, and I'll look across the spectrum.
There has been some that have added on since the
Yeah,
last.
exactly. These keep changing a little bit.
And to speak to devil advocate you back, I've got a lot of information out of the CDOT report they put out in 2018.
Yeah.
DUIs have decreased since this legalization took effect overall the state. So you're saying more people are smoking joints, well, they're not getting caught as much. So at least youth usage did come up slightly when it first was legalized, but that's come back down in the last 3 years as well. So
CDOT have that information?
absolutely.
Interesting.
I'd be happy to show stats too,
Thank you.
because I know that here we've arrested more, but
Yes.
that doesn't mean CDOT as a whole, I mean, the states.
People drive really stupid when they've been drinking, not so much when they've been smoking.
I've noticed in 64, everybody does about 500-1000 on Highway 66.
There you go.
It's really frustrating to commute in the morning.
It's not nearly as fun now that it's legal.
Are we done with this one, Mayor?
Yes.
The last topic, if you even feel like talking about the cigarette tax, we kind of brought this up as just a passing discussion. And they're basically, you as a board have the authority to put an additional tax on localized sales of cigarettes, is that what it comes down to?
exactly.
So, if you really think it's going to prevent kids from buying cigarettes, because kids don't buy cigarettes, number one.
Right.
And if you can bring a lot of money, that, I don't have a preference.
Well, it's not just cigarettes, it's vaping products.
It's vaping.
Which they do buy.
Exactly. It's all nicotine products.
It is all nicotine, chew, this and that, but if
It's
you really
easy to
think,
buy vaping products as well.
You think raising the taxes will keep them from doing
They're
it? I would
huge
argue
in the
yes.
high schools, so.
Just saving their money to buy pot.
There. I like it. I like it.
So we gotta get them one way or the other.
I defer to the mayor and the board. I'll have a preference.
It's entirely a board decision.
I say we stick to the ballot question we just previously talked about.
What would be a typical amount of increase per pack?
$3 a pack.
$3
Wow.
more?
Wow. We'll be buying cigarettes
Yes.
here.
That's,
Well,
that's.
yeah, I mean,
Well-
it becomes counterproductive, doesn't it? I mean, if Platteville institutes a $3 pack cigarette tax and Fort Lupton doesn't,
I think we should raise the taxes on candy.
Yeah, I'm just saying, that's what most communities are doing, $3 a pack, $3 a pack.
I wouldn't be in support of anything like that, like maybe
I mean, but
10
isn't
cents.
it counterproductive? At that point, your
You're gonna lose all your
cigarette
business, all your
sales
customers.
fall significantly, I would guess.
But we could raise it, we don't have to raise it $3.
Yeah.
It's not, it's
Yeah,
up
I'm
to
just saying,
$3.
that's what,
Yeah.
But
you can do anything you want, I'm
if we
saying.
do
Oh,
that, we
yeah.
have to hire someone to collect the taxes.
Correct, so that's the one thing to keep in mind, this will not be state collected, so you would have to actually hire
Another
someone in
employee.
town to collect those
And
taxes.
I would argue on this small community would not offset the
It's not
cost
gonna,
of hiring somebody, so.
What about the legal age? Isn't that also?
You can raise the age from 18 to 21.
I would be in favor of that. Like alcohol and marijuana are 21, cigarettes should be, in my opinion, wholeheartedly. Cigarettes are killing more people than marijuana.
You know what, pop causes diabetes, so maybe we should raise the age for buying pop too.
There is no minimum age to buy pot.
Right, we should raise it.
That was 18.
To buy pop?
Those are $3.
It's 18 for marijuana, by the way, it's not 21.
I said pop, like that's.
I know, but somebody else said it's 21 for marijuana.
Was there another option? Like, was our statement, was there three?
Yep,
What was the third option? It was increasing the taxes,
And age
increasing the
increase.
age. And then wasn't there a third option or not, just the two? Was it
For tobacco, we did
tobacco?
oh, and there's also, you can implement a licensing program for tobacco retailers, if you wanted to. But again, that requires staff time, you have to run a whole licensing program yourself.
Like, kinda like an alcohol.
Exactly, it would be
Authority.
just like liquor licensing. Yep, so.
Well, who does our liquor licensing?
So it doesn't sound like it's really worth it.
I think that the
So can
profits
they
don't
coincide at the
outweigh.
same?
Well, yeah, but we need to find a
Tobacco?
license.
Call
Yeah,
them.
but that's not a very efficient way of doing it if you're gonna hire staff to collect the money.
Consensus?
I think we just leave it.
Leave that in for another day discussion here. Okay, we'll leave that alone.
Well, just add a little light to the top. I'm thinking once we bring the marijuana, we should license the downtown area, like Deadwood, South Dakota.
We're
Just
gambling.
kidding, just kidding.
We have gunfights, right?
That wraps up tonight, so I'll work on some information for the board coming up, ballot questions and some tax information. Tomorrow night, we finish up our budget study session at 6:30, do capital projects. In prioritization, then I'll have a presentation on employees as far as staffing, and salaries and benefits. That's all I have.
Thank you. Thank you,
Okay.
everybody, for keeping us schedule.
Issue for medical,
Yes.
21 for recreation.
Yes, exactly, but